Good morning. It's time to begin. Let's all turn in the supplement to number 13. And after this song, Mike will lead us in our prayer before classes. You are the words and the music. You are the song that I sing. You are the melody. You are the harmony. Praise to your name I will bring. You are the Lord of lords. You are the mighty God. You are the King of all kings. So now I give back to you the songs that you gave to me. You are the song that I sing. Mike?
Our Heavenly Father, we come thanking you again for another opportunity that you've given us to gather here and study and worship you this morning. We pray, Lord, that you'll be with all the teachers as they go to their classrooms and they'll have a ready recollection and apply the words as you would have them to do. Be with us all that we may clear our minds and focus upon you and your word. These things we ask in Christ's name.
Amen. It works.
I'll check. You want more?
Anybody else need one?
Oh, bring some copies. If you don't mind, please. Thank you. No problem.
We'll have the rest of the worksheets here in just a moment. Good to see you, everybody. If you'd like to open your Bibles to the Gospel of John, chapter 8. We have visitors with us this morning. Appreciate so very much your being with us. Please feel free to join in our discussion. If you have any questions, it's good. Alan is here to answer all questions this morning. It was on the worksheet.
I don't notice that.
Maybe you'll look a little closer. I'll start making a pencil on it. We've been following the work of Jesus during the Feast of the Tabernacles. Chapter 7 covers the action from the very beginning between the discussion of Jesus and his brothers about going, and then Jesus secretly going into Jerusalem, and his public teachings, confrontation by the Pharisees, and his discussions there. And at the very beginning of chapter 8, we see that the Feast of the Tabernacle comes to an end. The last part of chapter 7 deals with what Jesus taught on the last day of the tabernacle and the questions and confrontations that he had with the Jews at that particular time. And chapter 8 kind of picks up with that. If you're there in chapter 8, well, let's begin, because the thought begins in verse 53 of chapter 7. And in verse 53 it says, "And everyone went to his own house, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives." So the feast ends, everyone has gone to their own home, and obviously when we get into chapter 8, there's going to be some people left in Jerusalem because Jesus goes to the temple and teaches there. And I don't know if those are the residents of Jerusalem or just people who who linger on after the Feast of the Tabernacles. But obviously somebody's there because some of the multitude are there. And because of the reaction of many of those, the Pharisees obviously, again, work on their plot to kill Jesus. So Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. And what is found at the Mount of Olives that's significant in the story of Jesus? The Garden of Gethsemane, exactly. So we see here, this is just one of the feasts that Jesus attends in Jerusalem. And obviously when we read about it going into Passover, once again Jesus goes there. So it's obviously it's up here, I believe, Morgan and Greg and you, I think, were no one was. Thank you, I appreciate that.
You bet, my pleasure.
So the Mount of Olives across the Kidron Valley, away from the mount, across from the Temple Mount, and it seems to be a favorite place for Jesus because we read about him frequenting that location, and I guess it's because of his habit to be there during these festivals that Judas understands and knows where he can find Jesus on the night that he betrays him. So because obviously Judas leads the soldiers to the garden where Jesus is praying. And it seems like the historians tell us that during these feast days, the city of Jerusalem is filled with Jews. And aside from the Feast of the Tabernacle, it is said that a lot of people would camp out. And the Mount of Olives and the Garden of Gethsemane was obviously a favorite place for Jesus because he would go there to pray, and obviously the apostles would go there to sleep. So it is a place that was frequented by Jesus. It's a familiar place, location in the story of Jesus, and especially in regards to his crucifixion. Now, before we read down verse 2 and go through verse 2 and verse 12, in every commentary that I have, there are pages after pages filled with whether or not John penned this event, the woman caught in adultery. And all manner of textual evidence is offered from the absence of these scriptures in some of the older manuscripts that have been found, to the fact that even manuscripts in the 9th century, some of them contained these texts, some of them did contain these texts. And I'm going to stand before you confessing I'm not a textual authority regarding which chapter and verse belongs or doesn't belong in a particular place in the New Testament. But I am a believer that God is just. And he's a just God, and just because he is going to judge us on the last day, and the standard of that judgment is going to be what?
His word.
The Word of God, exactly. He's revealed to us that standard. And God is powerful, God is wise, and God in his wisdom and power obviously has the ability to protect his standard, the word that man depends on in order to be saved. We're going to be judged by that. And there have been attempts throughout history to destroy the Bible, and none of those attempts have been successful. And obviously the finger of God is in regards to that. Now, I just say this. I don't know whether these scriptures happened at this particular time or not. But I know if they're in there, God put them there for some purpose or not. And whether or not it's chronologically accurate in the events that we're looking at, going from chapter 7 into chapter 8, Jesus staying in Jerusalem and teaching in the temple, it's completely irrelevant. Because I don't think that none of the other Gospels give a chronological account of the life of Jesus. Luke comes as close as any, but still there are some variances in the timing in Luke's account as well. So when it happened and why it happened is irrelevant to me. There's nothing in this account that contradicts any of the other teachings of Jesus. There's not anything in the account and Jesus' actions that contradict his character that's revealed to us in other places. So with all that said, you can argue if you want to whether or not it belongs there. But as far as I'm concerned, it belongs there. And there's great lessons to be learned from the things that are taught in just these few scriptures. So let's begin reading there in chapter 8 at verse 2. But early in the morning he came again to the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say? This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last. Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. So let's just stop right there. Now we have Jesus comes back to the temple after he had gone to Gethsemane. He's there and he's teaching, and he's confronted now again by the Pharisees. Over and over again we see in the gospel account their attempts in some way or the other to entrap him, especially in the things that he teaches. They want to discredit him in some way to the multitudes that are following him, that believe in him. Or if they could even catch him in something that's a violation of Roman law, they would be able to accuse him to the Roman government at that time. And this is just another attempt that they have, that they used in some shape or form to discredit Christ and entrap him. So they bring a woman to Jesus who's caught in adultery. John says the very act. Now, the fact that they were able to catch her in such an activity is interesting to me, because obviously they knew exactly when this was going to happen so that they could catch her in the very act. Usually those things are done in secret, and usually, just a few people understand it. Now these guys had caught her in the very act. Either they had previous knowledge of her activities so that they could accuse her, or, as one writer presumed, that they contrived the activity themselves so that they could use her to entrap Jesus. One thing that I think lends itself to the last theory is the fact that they only bring the woman to accuse her of this particular sin. Now, when the law is quite clear, look over and begin at Leviticus chapter 20. The law is very clear in regards to those who commit adultery. Now, to commit adultery requires how many? Two, obviously. At least two. Thank you very much. Exactly. At least two. Somebody read in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10. Leviticus chapter 20, verse 10.
The man who commits adultery with another man's wife, he who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death.
Now, who's to be put to death in regards to that sin? Both parties, okay? Now, let's go back just a step now. This woman was caught in adultery in the very act. So if they caught her in the very act, who else did they catch? The fellow had to be there as well. So in Leviticus chapter 20, the law says that both of those who are guilty are to be stoned. That's an interesting part that they leave out when they speak to Jesus. Turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 22. Deuteronomy chapter 22. We'll read verse 22. Marshall, when you get there, would you read that, please? Deuteronomy 22 at verse 22.
If a man is found lying with a woman married to a husband, then both of them shall die. The man that lay with the woman, and the woman, so shall put away the evil from Israel. So
when they make the statement to Jesus, the law says that this woman should be stoned. It just came to me, it really demonstrates in a very evident and obvious kind of way the hypocrisy of those Pharisees. They demonstrate that over and over again. You're not keeping the law, but they're not keeping the law in their accusation. They accuse this woman of adultery, but they don't have the man there because he would be accused as well. So if she was caught in the very act, so was the man. Where's the man? So it just raises the suspicion about this entrapment that they're trying to work on Jesus himself. And it kind of substantiates the comment of that obviously it was contrived, and maybe one of their number was involved with this, and they promised he wouldn't be stoned, whatever it might have been. But here we have again the hypocrisy of the Pharisees demonstrated in the fact that they don't include in their statement the law that pertains to both guilty parties in regards to that sin. Any thoughts about that?
We find that as a selective application of the law for their purposes, the purpose of entrapping him, because he's in an awkward position here, because the law clearly said that, but the law also said that the man that was guilty would be put to death too. Is Jesus going to say, follow the law? And this goes back to the Ten Commandments, the law of Moses.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not commit adultery. This goes back that far. And so is he going to say, follow the law and do what it says? Or is he going to say, well, ignore the law and pay no attention to it? That's the trap they're laying for him. And either way, if he said either one of those things, they're going to say, aha, you're not who you say you are.
Now, if he says, well, the law says that she is worthy of being stoned, she should be stoned. What can the Pharisees say about that? What accusation can they use against Jesus in regard to that? If he says, well, you need to do what the law says.
Well, you've ignored other laws, you've ignored the Sabbath, you've ignored other things.
Well, and that's true, but how can the Pharisees use that response against Jesus? He says, do what the law commands.
That's only half of what.
Carl?
He's on the way to doing away with the law. And not teaching the person that
And that would be true. What do we learn about Roman law and Jewish law when the Jews bring Christ to Pontius Pilate to have him crucified? Okay. I'm sorry. Somebody else had a comment.
They don't have the power.
They don't.
They don't have the power to enforce that.
Okay. They don't have the authority to punish someone with capital punishment until that individual goes through the Roman process of justice. They can't say, we're going to stone you and take you out of the city and stone them. They don't have that authority. So if Jesus says, well, you need to take her out and stone her, they can go to the Romans and say, this man is violating Roman law. So then the Romans would be able to, in some shape, form, or fashion, discredit Jesus or remove him from their, be a source of removal from their problem with Jesus and his popularity. So the hypocrisy is seen, their foolishness, if you will, about the questions that they ask him is seen. So now Jesus, in their statement, now Moses in the law commanded that such should be stoned. And the Jews really think they've got Jesus in a lose-lose situation here. But what's really interesting to me, what has Jesus demonstrated over and over again in the Gospel of John that we've looked at in regards to the Pharisees and their intentions? What does he do repeatedly?
He understands that they're trying to trap him or trick him and responds. He knows that before and responds accordingly.
Okay, the word understands need to be replaced with something. His demonstration of his deity, he said what?
He knows what they're thinking.
And how does he do that?
Because he knows man's heart.
There you go. He said he can read man's mind. I think, and of course, we've talked about how that is a demonstration of his deity. He knows the hearts of man. And to me, these Pharisees really got a loose screw, because over and over again, they've come to him and he's known what they wanted before they even start talking. And now they're going to accuse him. What makes them think he doesn't know what they're doing at this particular time? And so just so many things about this that is foolish on the part of the accusers, of the Pharisees, trying to entrap Jesus. So he said the Jews were terribly forgetful, as one writer put it. Now,
Buddy?
I
Yes.
think it, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ken.
I think it just shows how much they were afraid of him taking away the power that because they had been thwarted every time they tried to trap him and they couldn't.
Exactly. Exactly.
And they were getting frustrated, so they were trying whatever they could do.
Grasping at straws. Yeah, I think that you're exactly right. Yes, sir.
I couldn't help but think when you said about why do they keep doing this? Well, how many criminals think I'm smart enough to beat the system? I know how to do this and not get caught because I'm smarter than everybody else. Well, that's what they think. I'm smarter than he is. At some point, I'm going to win
Why do they think they're smarter than Jesus?
because they're the experts.
Yeah, he's what? He's just a what?
He's just a carpenter.
He's just a carpenter. They are what? The educated elite of the religion. You know, they're the religious leaders. You know, the Pharisees didn't think they're better than the Sadducees. But they had to get along with the Sadducees because the Romans appointed them leaders of the temple and temple worship. So they had to have, you know, some cooperation regards it. But these people think that they're the only ones that know the law. In fact, when we go back in chapter 7, and the people are making comments about Jesus being the prophet and being the Christ, and they respond by saying, these people who don't know the law are cursed. And in that statement, you know, they elevate themselves up, being so much more educated, smarter than anybody else in regards to what the law says and how it's applied. Now, they ask him the question. Jesus stoops down and he waits. What is Jesus' response to the question?
Silence,
I'm sorry?
silence.
Silence, exactly. He doesn't say anything. John says he stoops down as if he didn't hear, which is really kind of interesting to me. You know, General Eisenhower said at the beginning of the D-Day invasion of Europe, he wrote in his biography, you can plan extensively, but when you engage in the battle, if your enemy doesn't respond in the way you thought he would, all of your plans are of no use. Now think about this. Here comes the Pharisees. I don't know how long they worked on this particular entrapment. Obviously, a while. They had to, at least follow this woman to catch her in what she was doing, or they had to, arrange that sin committed, whatever it was. But you can tell they've been planning this for a while, and they come to him and they think right away he's going to give them a verbal response. And that verbal response is something they can use against him one way or the other. Take him to the Romans or discredit him in front of the multitudes. And what does Jesus say? No. He bends down and writes in the dust. Whatever their plans were, obviously Jesus thwarts. He doesn't respond in the way they think that he's going to respond. So what happens to their plans? They tear them up and throw them out the window. Now they got to figure something else out.
He did not fall for that trap.
I'm sorry?
He did not fall into that trap.
He did not fall into the trap.
If he doesn't respond the first time, keep asking him again. Don't let him off the hook.
Yeah. And he continues to be silent in regards to that, which is all very interesting about that. So he doesn't respond. He sits down and he writes in the dust. What does Jesus write in the dirt?
That's what I want to do.
Well, what does he write in the dirt? What's your theory?
It doesn't matter.
Y'all
I'm sorry?
are stupid.
Thank you, Chad, for that. Basically, I don't know what he was writing, but that could have very well been a good response. There's all kinds of theories about what he wrote in the dirt.
Does it matter?
And I have heard two sermons on what Jesus wrote in the dirt. Think about that for a minute. Somebody gets up and starts talking about what he wrote in the dirt. And what did he write? He could be drawing a cartoon in the dirt. I don't know what it is. All kinds of theories. Let me see some of the things he said. Some said it could be a symbolic word of doom, like the writing on the wall that's in the book of Daniel. Some graphic words like many, many tinkle, you know, you've been waiting and been found wanting, something like that. But other people can say that he was writing what the law really said about this adultery. Whatever it was. What was the purpose of him squatting down and writing in the dirt?
Ignoring the Pharisees.
Okay, but why ignore them? Why not respond? Why this silent pause?
It says that their charges are ridiculous.
Okay.
I told you. I told you.
Well,
Why the pause?
by not responding to them, he takes away their credibility.
Exactly. I think that's exactly it. I don't know. They talk about planning in attacks or invasions or bushwhacks as far as battle is concerned. The longer you make the enemy wait, the more nervous they get, the more mistakes they make. So he gives this pause. Yes.
I just thought of something, and it goes along with the fact that as if he didn't hear them, maybe he was just doodling, just scratching around. He's writing in the dirt. Maybe he's not writing anything.
That's a good guess.
I never even thought about that.
That's a good guess.
It's
I'm
as
just
good as
saying.
any other.
It's as good a guess as any other. Yes, sir.
By him by him hearing the question and pretending he didn't hear him, I bet it made him nervous. They were standing there nervous, wondering what he was going to say, or if he was going to say anything at all.
Okay. The first thing it is, their plans go awry here because he doesn't respond. They've got it set out. If he responds this way, or if he responds this way, we can act this way, or we can act that way. And he doesn't respond. He makes, one writer says, pausing can have different effects. It can give one who is going to answer time to think about what to say and how to say it. I don't think that applies to Jesus because I think obviously his knowledge, he knew what he was going to say before it happened. But then it can also make the accusers very nervous, more apt to falter in their response to his answer. And, what happens the second time that Jesus pauses?
Everybody left.
But what happens during that pause?
They continued to ask.
No, the second pause. After he responds, let those who are without sin throw the first stone.
Stoop down again to write in the.
What happened during that second pause?
Everybody left.
They left.
We don't know, but when? Why?
Because they knew they couldn't do it.
They begin to think. They didn't think about that. Their plans have been thwarted. He didn't respond the way that they should. They thought he was going to. And now he says, he puts, basically, when they accuse him, they kind of, as one writer said, they put the ball in his court. And with his response, he puts the ball back in their court. And now they've got to think about what he has said. And what did Jesus say when he responded?
That him who is without sin cast the first stone.
Okay, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. So the second pause causes them to think. I think the first pause makes them nervous because they continue to ask the question. He continues to ignore them. And then when he does respond, he doesn't respond in any way like they thought that he would. And there's not, yes, Ken.
Well, the Pharisees also realized that they would lose all credibility with the crowd if they admitted that they had never sinned.
Oh, yeah. Now, that's a good point, too. Yeah. But I don't know that it applies right here because these people are intent on entrapping Jesus some shape, form, or fashion. And John tells us they've been convicted by what? I'm sorry?
Their conscience.
By their conscience. Now, what does that tell us, David?
They're thinking
About
their own.
thinking about themselves. No longer are they thinking about Jesus and entrapping Jesus. Now they're actually looking inward. And obviously, that's what Jesus wanted them to do. Yes, ma'am.
And besides, they were afraid to do it themselves. They intended to incite this riot of the people that were there. And those people began to leave. They couldn't do it themselves after all the people leave. They're afraid that they will be blamed.
Okay, you say the people, the crowds, the
Okay,
multitudes?
the people that were there and these that were accusing, they didn't intend to do it themselves. They intended for these people that they were building up into this to do it. Because there were other people there besides them. You think they were the only ones there that brought this to Jesus? Oh no, they wanted an audience.
Well, that could very well be why. Obviously, he's teaching people in the temple. If the events occurred in the temple, there would be people there. But it doesn't say that the multitude left. Who does it say left? Who left after Jesus answered the second?
Those who heard.
We heard it.
Okay, who was he speaking to? He's not speaking to the multitudes. He's talking to who? Those people that are accusing him. Those are people that brought the woman and said, this woman deserves to be stoned. Is that what the law says? What do you respond to that? How do you do that? These are the ones that Jesus is talking about. And again, their hypocrisy is just demonstrated over and over again. So in verse 7 it says, he who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. Where does that come from? Where does Jesus' response come from?
The law.
The law, exactly. I'm always amazed that Jesus is the perfect teacher. We've talked about that over and over again. But he's also the perfect debater. Don't you kind of get that sense in regards to this discussion that he's having with the Pharisees? They presented him with their challenge. He paused, and then he presented them with the answer. If you're out sin, you can throw the stone at him first. And obviously that comes directly from the law, because they have introduced the law themselves. They say, teacher, the law says. Now Jesus is giving some instruction about what the law really says. And it's an application. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 17. Deuteronomy chapter 17. Alan, would you read verse 6 and 7? This is Deuteronomy 17, verse 6 and 7.
Whoever is worthy of death shall be put to death on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, but he shall not be put to death on the testimony of 1 witness. The hands of the witnesses shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hands of all the people. So you shall put away the evil person from among you.
Okay, obviously within the law, the witnesses are those who are not guilty, not worthy of death. So Jesus says, if you're without sin, they were accusing this woman of being sinful. If you're without sin, you throw the first stone. You're the ones that are obligated to punish her. And then what do they do? What is their response? What did they do?
One by one, letting it.
So they left. Why did they leave?
Because they knew that they had sinned.
Exactly. Now, this is very interesting to me. The response and the reaction to Jesus' response is it's really kind of interesting, because these Pharisees had heard Jesus over and over teach things that revealed to them their sinfulness, their hypocrisy, all of those things that, they're working in some shape, form, or fashion to discredit him with, all of their entrapment, their methods of entrapment, all the things that they would say. Now, you get the idea that these people are completely calloused in regards to their own sinfulness. They bring the law up to punish Jesus, but they violate the law in doing that. They have no regard for the law. And you just kind of get this picture in your mind of these Pharisees. How are they going to do some kind of self-examination and say, I'm really guilty of sin. I'm really guilty of doing that. How many people today are easily convicted by their own conscience? Yes, ma'am?
Oh, I thought you were asking a question.
Huh?
I thought you were asking, How many of us?
That was a question. How many people today are convicted by their own conscience? The majority? The minority? What convicts man in his conscience? What is it that causes that conviction?
When they get caught in it.
And that's true, but caught in regards to what?
The sin.
The law. What the Word of God says. And that's exactly what Jesus uses now against these learned people, learned of the law, educated elite leaders of the religion of the Jews. That's exactly what he uses against them. And in this particular case, his accusation actually penetrates their heart. Do you think this is unusual? It hasn't worked before, has it? I think only Nicodemus is the one that has been affected by the actions and teachings of Jesus. And how was Nicodemus affected? What caused Nicodemus's belief? Way back in chapter 3. What did Nicodemus say to Jesus about him being a man from God? The miracles caught his attention. Had the miracles caught the attention of the Pharisees so far? Obviously not. Because they're accusing Jesus of those miracles by doing them by the power of who? The devil, exactly. You have a demon. That's the reason you got all this power. And so, to me, it either demonstrates greatly the power of God's Word, or it illustrates or indicates the finger of God in regards to the work of Jesus. We've often talked about that before. What was it that kept the Jews from, killing Jesus when they first got mad at him? And what was it that, prevented them from doing that until the time had been complete? Now, obviously, God working in some shape, form, or fashion. So, here we have this response. Andy.
Buddy, I kind of agree. It puzzles me why it seems to work on them this time and it doesn't other times. But I think like we talked about before, they came and put the ball in Jesus' court. All this, you can almost just feel the tension in this story. They presented him with this big case. And then as he doesn't say anything, it's like you can feel the tension just start to shift back the other direction. And he just uses that momentum completely against them and then throws something out they weren't ready for. But it's very different than his approach to preach, woe you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. That was a different approach. They weren't going to take it well. This one, they just weren't expecting. He just took the. And I guess it goes to show how we need to be tactful sometimes too, as well.
Oh yeah.
As wise as Jesus was to handle these situations.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because Jesus in his patience takes control of the situation by his actions, not specifically about his words. I like the point you're making. The last sermon that he preaches in the last week of his life, when he stands up and points the fingers at the Pharisees and directly accuses them of breaking the law in so many different ways. Now he doesn't say anything, and his non-response becomes just as much an accusation towards them as the sermon itself. That's a very excellent point. And I think probably what that does is help us to understand the power of influence, the power of our example. What Peter says, that the non-believing wife can have influence on the believing wife can have influence on the non-believing husband by the things that she does. So our influence is powerful. And that's a good illustration of that. Yes, ma'am.
And they were denying that Jesus was from God. But these people knew what the law said. Now, they didn't follow it, but they were scholars. They knew what it said. And so before, they were refusing to receive the miracles and Jesus' teaching about being from God. But now we're down to the law. They said the law says, and he said, okay, you without sin. Throw the first stone. He put the law right back to them.
That's exactly
But these other things are speaking to the heart of Jesus' message.
Yeah.
And I think that was the difference in that here, they had a conscience because they knew what the law said.
And that is a very good point. I think so. I agree with they knew the law, but I think that they had, I don't know what word you would use, not the ability, they ignored the law, obviously, but they would interpret the law the way that they wanted to interpret it. And in that way, they would justify their actions. And they used the law to their advantage. That's what they're trying to do there.
But this law that they used, the second part of it was, you without sin, or you the accuser, cast the first stone. Now he's using that same law.
Exactly.
You know, so for them to violate that would have been.
Yeah. In fact, well, they should have known before they brought it there that it was a violation of the law in the first place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Carl?
Well, they're in the middle of sin. If they're doing it for the wrong reason, trying to catch him, that's the wrong reason. They're using harder. They're in sin themselves right there.
Exactly. And I think that that's probably some of the things that affected their conscience when Jesus spoke to them that way. Because obviously they violated the law to get the woman there in the first place so that they could accuse Jesus. Yes, Jim?
I think the irony of the whole situation is, they didn't believe Jesus was who he said, his miracles and all that, but there is one person there that could have stoned her. Jesus was without sin. And the fact that he doesn't do that thwarts everything that they said.
Well, and of course, but Jesus is following the law because the accusers are those who are to throw the first stone according to the law.
And they would have to be.
And he wasn't an accuser, nor was he a witness. So in his actions, he follows the law perfectly.
But by saying that, it just again emphasizes who he is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, that is a good point. That is a good point, Jamie.
That's the whole reason the Pharisees are mad to begin with, is because they can't control Jesus the way they want. They want him to interpret the law the way they've done it, and have their thumb over him because they're the rulers.
Yeah.
And he's saying things that they don't like, and that's why they're so mad to begin with.
That's exactly right. That's a good point. Somebody else had their hand up over here. Okay, we're going to stop right there.
Buddy, which was more difficult for them? To acknowledge Jesus as who he said he was and the power he said he had, or to admit their own sin and walk away?
Now, that's a good question. In fact, that'll be the question we'll answer the next time. What was the question again? State it loud enough so everybody hears.
Which was easier for them to acknowledge Christ and his deity and who he said he was, or to acknowledge their own sin and walk away?
There you go. I think that's a great question. Why was Jesus' response the perfect response to his accusers? And that's a good point in regards to that. Thank you very much for your participation in our study.